My name is Ladislau Steiner. I have a short visit in Stockholm, and on behalf of the Cushing Society, I interview Professor Carl Gustaf Bernhard, illustrious representative not only of Karolinska Institute, but of the whole Scandinavian science, and I dare to say even world science. He was involved, besides his professorship in the Department of Physiology in the Karolinska Institute, in the activity of the Nobel Prize. He was in the Nobel Committee. He was the secretary, president of the Swedish Academy of Science, and he is in the present the advisor of His Majesty, the Swedish King, in science matters. He practically knew closely all Nobel Prize winners in medicine, and therefore I think that this interview will be fascinating and instructive for the young neurosurgeon of the world. Thank you, Professor Gustaf, for coming to give us this interview. The Cushing Society has this archive both for documentation of the leaders, the achievement of the leaders in neuroscience, but also has a practical purpose to teach the young neuroscience people to see the roots of what exists today in neuroscience, and to give them the sense of the importance of the tradition, of the continuity in this science. So what we would like that your interview, your information, what you give, are both personal and then in general for neurosciences. So maybe we start with your background, the family, your childhood, your schools in Stockholm.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to do my best for the Cushing Society. I am a pure Stockholm man. I've been in Stockholm all my life. I was in school in Stockholm, and then I continued at the Karolinska Institute of Medical School in Stockholm, as a student, as a researcher, as professor, and then it turned out that some years before I should end, I was elected president of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, as you mentioned, which is also in Stockholm. Now, you may perhaps be interested to know why the people you interview have got into their various fields. As a boy, I was very much interested in natural sciences as a whole. Actually, I was perhaps most interested in botany, which is not very surprising in some way because we have the Linnaean tradition here in Sweden. And so that's not very that's rather common. But then when that was towards the last years in the school, I got tuberculosis, which very many of us here up in Sweden then were catched by, and so I was in in hospital for some years, and then I got more and more interested in medicine. So after school, I went into Karolinska. I was happy to have enough points to be accepted, and started to study medicine. Now, at that time, the professor of pharmacology was very much interested in his pupils. The professor of physiology was more of a theoretic man, and he was not very much interested in experimental physiology. So in my generation, most of those people were working in the lab of Liljestrand, Professor Liljestrand. And we started already during the 4 years of medical studies. We were accepted so we could do it together with the studies. Now, how did I come into neurophysiology? Well, I don't know if it was like that, but I feel it was something like this. I happened to listen to the Nobel lectures given by Sir Charles Sherrington and Adrian. They came here in 1932 to give the Nobel lectures. And this is a picture of Adrian, who then became later on Master of Trinity. He was then made Lord Adrian. He could not be made Lord of Trinity, so he was made Lord of Cambridge. Very well-known man and a charming fellow. And Sherrington is a portrait of Sherrington. I understood what Adrian said, but I didn't understand a word of what Sherrington said. He was speaking in English, which was represented many years before the 30s. But anyhow, they meant a lot, having met those two in 32. As I said, we were working in Liljestrand's lab. There was also, at that time, Ulf von Euler. So we became friends very early. I returned to him later on. And in Liljestrand's lab, they were interested in the alcohol questions, the take-up of alcohol, the absorption of alcohol, the elimination of alcohol, the effects of alcohol. So there were a group of people working on that problem. So I learned what science was mainly, to learn to read the books, to find yourself, and to do experimental work and to treat it statistically. All these things that you have to learn was at the pharmacology. Now it so happened that I got the possibility as a student to come to Leningrad, that was in 1935, to the Pavlov laboratory. I met Pavlov. I had then got more interested towards the neuro side, but unfortunately Pavlov got pneumonia, and so I just met him, that was all. But I stayed over the Congress, International Congress, in 1935. And Liljestrand was there, and he was very, very nice that he always introduced us young students to the old fellows. And at that occasion, as a young fellow, I had the pleasure of meeting Otto Löwy, who found the Vagusstoff, the transmission mechanism in the heart, and got the Nobel Prize together with Sir Henry Dale in the 30s. And there was also Barcroft, the English physiologist. There was Gasser from America. And so I came to know them at that very early stage, and also Adrian. And I remember very well that Adrian, when he heard that I had been for some months in Leningrad, he asked me about my opinion about the Soviet Union. And I said, when I had been here a week, I thought that I could tell you something about it. But now I've been here for 3 months, and now I don't understand anything. And then some days later on, Adrian came to me and said, now I understand what you mean. So now back to neurophysiology. Actually, in the 20s, the German psychiatrist Berger came with his publication on the possibility of recording from outside the skull the brain activity, the so-called at that time Berger waves. That is what we call now the electroencephalogram. And some people were very critical about it. Among them was Adrian. So he did himself, together with some young co-workers, he did some work and recorded the activity they recorded from his brain. And there you find these regular waves. And then Adrian thought, we'll see if another sort of brain will do the same, or something like it. So he took a water beetle with that little optic ganglion, and then you can see the waves of Adrian, and above you see the waves of the water beetle, and what is called the blocking, when you block the activity with light. And it's very difficult to separate the two. That's the same sort of thing, which is not surprising nowadays, but this was made just for fun at that time.
But after he made these experiments, he changed his mind, and
Yes.
he started to believe in
he believed. That's right. Excuse me. That he did. This was just for fun. So we started then together with Carl-Redo Skoglund, who passed away some years ago, unfortunately. We are here together in 39, started a little laboratory in the pediatric clinic belonging to the Karolinska. And this is a picture of the very primitive setup that we used at that time. Now the interest concentrated to the effect of light. That is the blocking of the alpha rhythm. And then I got interested also what happened in the path up to the cortex, in the retina, optic nerve, and at the cortical level. So that was the substance, more or less, of my dissertation. That was in 1940. When I got interested in the so-called ERG, that is the electrical activity of the retina, we had here in Scandinavia a very famous specialist on that. It was Ragnar Granit, professor of physiology in Helsinki.
Just a moment. At that time, you were already professor of neurophysiology.
No,
I'm
still student.
Student.
No.
Yeah.
We are still in 1939.
39.
No.
Yeah.
I'm working now at this when the time when I did my dissertation. So I got some money, a stipend to go and work with Granit and learned about the ERG. So then we met and we came together. When I came home, that was in 39, I said, I got to know when I was there that Granit was actually asked for. They wanted to have him to have a position in America. And Skoglund and I, we thought that it would be very sad if he would leave Scandinavia, and we thought we had to do something about it. And we went to the Wallenberg Foundation and asked about the interest from their side to support neurophysiology and the work which we then should do together, we three.
Is that you were still a student?
I was a student, yes.
Yeah.
I was working on my dissertation. And then, of course, I have to persuade the rector of Karolinska and so that he could persuade the faculty. And that was a very active rector, Holmgren. Actually, he was a man who took Barani old Bernhard to Sweden once upon a time, and I will return to him later on. So anyhow, we got, no, application was sent from Karolinska to the Wallenberg Foundation. But then in an evening in November, I got a telephone call from the Wallenberg Foundation said, no, you can forget about it, because now the Russians have bombed Helsinki. So
that was in 39.
That was 39, the beginning of the Winter War. And some days later on, I got a letter from Granit, which he has written in the cellar when the bombs were dropping over their heads in Helsinki. So that changed the picture, but not more for half a year. Then it was taken up again, and we got the money, and to put the story short, a little department of neurophysiology was set up. We sailed together with Granit from Finland. He came here, and we started the Institute of Neurophysiology, which then became a Nobel Institute. Later on, they got Nobel money and became a Nobel Institute. Very primitive conditions at that time. Most of the apparatus we made ourselves, the amplifiers, and we had to mount the oscillographs and whatnot. And you are shielded, the room was shielded, and you are shielded yourself to get rid of the disturbances, which were very bad at that time.
But we should emphasize that you were still a student,
Yes.
and you managed to obtain the help of the authorities for a Nobel Institute.
Well, for an institute which then, some years later was made.
Yes.
Yes, together with school, and we did that. We were so enthusiastic about the development of neurophysiology, which we could read about in the international journals. You know, that was the time when the neurophysiology went up, and then came the new journal of neurophysiology that Fulton was the editor of, and all that happened in journal of physiology in the field. So then we were working in neurophysiology. What was quite important, another fellow who to me and to many of us were most important was Herbert Gasser. Herbert Gasser was made his main work in the 20s together with Erlanger, and he got the Nobel Prize in 1944 during the war. But those who got the prize during the war couldn't come here, so they were collected and came here in 1945. So then I met Gasser, and we all met Gasser, and we became very close friends. And as I shall tell you, some years later I came over to the Rockefeller, and that was a sort of second home for me. We had a lot of cooperation with the whole group there. Now, this was in 45. Then the war ended, and that opened up the possibilities for us to get out and to come to various laboratories and to learn about what's going on. And I would say that the year 47 was most important to me, because then I got a stipend. I had then made my dissertation, and I done some postdoctoral work, and I got a stipend to go to the States, and also to attend the Oxford Congress. That was the first Congress after Physiological Congress after the war. And I think we were 700 people. That was all. Nowadays you are 10 or 20,000 or whatnot. But the 700 was very charming, fantastic to meet again. I had seen the people then, as I told you, in Leningrad in 35.
So you met them again after so many years.
Yes. Then I have Ajan and Sir Henry Dale and all those people. Now, in America, I met several of the neurophysiologists, and some are of special interest in this context. And I should like then just to mention about Hartline. Keffer Hartline, who made very basic research on vision, and he made his work on the horseshoe crab, which sounds funny. It's not a crab, it's a sort of spider, and it appears on the east coast of the big continents. And that's because it's a very simple eye. And he wanted to have an eye which is not where you have a fiber coming from the receptors just going up to the next station, and where you don't have this very complicated net that you of network of neurons as you have in the vertebrate and eyes. And he made very basic research showing the behavior of single receptors and how the response was in the fibers coming from the receptors. What was also important, the interplay between in a very, very simple network where you have inhibition, inhibitory influence from the side. You call it lateral inhibition coming to the excited neuron. Now, later on, I shall now continue a little bit further on this line, because later on, it was in '60, I was over then to work, to have a nice time. I had a leave of absence, I think, go to Hartline. He then had moved to the Rockefeller Institute. He was actually in Johnson Foundation in Philadelphia. He was an old friend of Granit, same age, and both are then passed away, unfortunately. There I met one of his students, and we started together to work. I then had come back to the insect eye. I mentioned about the agent's recording from the water beetle, and I did some very early work on the water beetle to separate the receptor response from the fiber response. And now I had come back to the insect eye, which is a marvelous gadget, and started to work together with one of Hartline's people, Bill Miller. And then we managed to discover a new, make a discover of a structure which was not known at all, and now it's pure physics.
That was in Rockefeller Institute?
That's what the Rockefeller Institute.
Piece of work, yes.
We started that, and then Miller came to Sweden, and we continued here in Sweden, and then I went back to Rockefeller. That's sort of cooperation. And what happened was that if you, these small facets, you know, the insect eye is a compound eye, a lot of up to several thousand facets in some of the insects, and each little lens has protuberances like small pyramids. So it's not a smooth lens. It has these protuberances, which is of the size of half the wavelength of light. Now this was a real discovery, and it was unexpected, absolutely unexpected, and the trouble was now to find out what does it do. I think it took a year before we really started to do experiment on that. What we did was, because you cannot cut these small nipples with, we call them nipples, with a knife, but we scaled the whole thing up to centimeter waves. Instead of using light, you use radio waves and on the centimeter scale, and you make a lens of beeswax. And this was a work together with a Danish audiologist, Åge Möller. So we three together did this work and showed that this is what we call an impedance transformer. That means it increases transmission and decreases reflection. Now, it's interesting, if you go through the insects, especially the noctuid insects have it. And you see the noctuid insects are very, very dependent on to catch every little photon. So it's very important for them to, some single protons might be very important for them. And this increases the possibility for them then to survive. Now, this is a now line, but we started with Heartline. So to say, now we are up in the 60s. And in 67, I had the honor and pleasure to give the speech in the concert hall when Granite, whom I mentioned, Heartline, and another friend from America, George Wald, got the prize together for their work on the retina. Wald was, of course, on the the chemistry of the visual purple. Now, so this is a picture from the delivery of the prize. But this, to come back to Adrian, at that occasion, which was 67, Adrian, of course, the old prize winners are invited to come. So he happened to be there. So at the presentation, I also could turn to Adrian, now the elderly, old, really one of the founders of modern neurophysiology was there. And here's a picture where you can see Adrian and Heartline. And there's me. I was then the Secretary General of the... No, that's before that time. And then the Secretary General of the Swedish Academy of Literature, Karl Ragnar Giro. I like that picture.
It's interesting listening to you. One has the impression that the events flow from one to the other, and you don't observe that maybe 10 years, 15 years passed, that you as a student became already as a professor, you became as a member of the Nobel Prize committee and so on. And the same people you meet as a student then slowly becomes the Nobel Prize winner. So it means that it was probably a very narrow circle of talented people you moved.
Absolutely, that's true, that's true. And I felt that even more when they later on became President and Secretary General of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, because as a secretary, you are chairing the so-called classes for physics and chemistry and also economy, which put up the proposal for the prize in physics, chemistry and economy. And it's surprising, as you say, that it is even so, it is a sort of circle that you move in, which is rather restricted in some way. It was a very, very interesting experience, and having been on the committee for medicine out and in for 25 years, it was most interesting also to experience the work in physics and chemistry. Then, of course, the prize in economics, but that's far from my field. Now, I should mention also that now I have tried to follow some lines. I put one line from Heartline and so on. If we go back to the 40s and the first years of when I was professor, I worked on the spinal cord, on the afferent pathways and on the downstream, the motor neurons, the influence of the cortical cells on the motor neurons. So I had some years which I devoted to the spinal cord, and therefore met a lot of spinal cord people. Then later on, I returned, as I mentioned, to the insect eye. And there we studied mainly the regulation of the energy transmission to the receptors in these very, very fascinating eyes. Now, if you return now to the year 47, among the other people whom I met was Steve Kuffler. Steve Kuffler, who became a very close friend. He was born in Vienna. He lost his whole family, and he went then during the Nazi time. He went to Australia, and there he was picked up, so to say, by Eccles, the well-known neurophysiologist, whom I also have some pictures here. There, with Eccles was also working Bernhard Katz, who came from Leipzig. He was a refugee from Leipzig. And Eccles, Kuffler, and Katz was a very important group. Now, then Katz went to London, and Kuffler went to America, and 47 I met him in Baltimore. He had been in Chicago, and then he built up a marvelous laboratory in Baltimore, working on muscle. But he then went into the eye, into vision, and made some work founded on the observation by Hartline. He worked out the so-called dynamics of the receptor fields in the retina, and did some very, very nice work on that. This is a picture from about the 50s. Now, and we became very close friends, and we often met. He came here, and we had a lot of discussions, and also we have an exchange of younger collaborators. And this is in the end of 1949. In the physiological lab, I was then recently new professor of physiology, and we had these new buildings, and there's two of my pupils, and that is David Ottosson, who then came after me as professor, and then Torsten Wiesel.
Who got then the Nobel Prize.
Yeah, and he then, Steve Kuffler asked me if I had somebody who could come for some longer time to work with him. And I said to Torsten, you should go there, you have really a possibility now. He was just wondering. I had to persuade him, said you better go. He went there, and then he started to work, first together with the fellow Brown, but then together with Jubel, and they worked very nicely together. And when I was over there in the beginning of the 50s, I saw some of the first work they had. And I thought, if they're going on with this will be a Nobel Prize, surely. Because what they showed was how the cortical cells receives the information from the retina, and how the cells are, let's say, are managing, and how they managing the input to giving the brain the possibility to let's say, see contours and contrast and all that sort of thing. Now, and also they could show how the development of these various functions takes place. So this was a picture from the beginning of the 50s. Now, here are the same three people when Jubel and Wiesel got the Nobel Prize. So there's Wiesel, there's me, and there's Ottosson.
As a student, and he he got the Nobel Prize.
Oh, so that was in 81, I think. And this again are the three again, a little bit older, and that is when Wiesel came to give a lecture at a so-called Bernhard lecture at the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. Now, my Ottosson, he is retired. Wiesel is, he is now head of the Rockefeller. So, but he is about 62 or something like that, so he's still some work, but now he's, of course, administrator.
Did Kuffler receive also the Nobel Prize?
No, he did not. They got it. This was later on. I had moved then to the academy. So the man who gave the speech was Ottosson. Actually, on the stage was Ottosson giving the speech to the other pupil, Torsten Wiesel. That was nice.
Let me emphasize a few things here from this discussed with Professor Bernhard. As a young student, Professor Bernhard insists and work for the invitation of Granit to the Karolinska Institute. Professor Bernhard writes his thesis on the physiology of the vision. He has a number of students. He has contacts with different colleagues, Koffler, etc., who also work in this field. And then one of his pupils, Wiesel, is sent by Professor Bernhard to Koffler, and Wiesel will receive the Nobel Prize together with Jubel. And Granit again will get a Nobel Prize. So in some way, everything is happening around Professor Bernhard. It's like with this nightingale who are coming around a light. I cannot explain how it happened, but when you explain, you put it the facts, it seems so that a lot of things happened since your time as a student until you became an important person in the Karolinska.
It looks like that.
Yes.
But of course, it happened a lot in between that I have left. I have tried to follow some lines.
Yes.
So it's perhaps it looks perhaps a little bit too simple, but well, anyhow, it was like that. Now, some other people, I think, persons, friends, I should mention about is, of course, my very close friend, Ulf von Euler, who I'm already in the time of, in the 30s, beginning of the 30s, was working in the laboratory of Lillestrand. And he got the prize together with another friend of mine, whom I met first time at the Oxford Congress, and we see each other very often still, and that was Bernhard Katz. Ulf von Euler and Bernhard Katz and Axelrod from America got the Nobel Prize for the discoveries and the mechanism of the transmission, synaptic transmission, neuromuscular transmission. Now, here is
excuse me, von Euler. It was father and son.
and
The father received also the Nobel Prize.
yes, in chemistry.
Yes, and then the son received the Nobel
Yes.
Prize in
Physiology.
physiology. Yes.
And that was because he the discovery of noradrenaline
Yes.
as a transmitter in the nervous system. And Sir Henry Dale had got it together with Dale in the 30s on the transmission in the heart, the neuromuscular transmission in the heart, and Katz, of course, on the transmission from nerve to muscle, the quantum mechanism.
But then the story goes further, and Bergström and Samuelson got the Nobel Prize for the prostaglandin.
No. The interesting thing is that prostaglandin, the basic work, really was made by von Euler together with Gaddum a long time ago.
Yeah.
So but then he left that and concentrated on noradrenaline. Then, just for fun, I think I should mention another very interesting person, and that is von Bekesee. I met him very early. I think it was when he came over in the 40s. He was born in Hungary. He was a physicist, and then he was interested to set up experiments in physics, and there were very limited possibilities. But he had the possibility when in the office of telephone and post. And what he was then doing was to test signals, clicks between Budapest and Berlin. And then he observed, he made observations when he did that and got interested in the ear. So he started to read about the physiology of the ear and found out that there was several theories, but there was lacking very much of experimental evidence. Now he made marvelous discoveries on the transmission in the outer ear, and also in the middle ear, the movements of the in the inner ear, the movements of the basilar membrane, and how it stimulates the sensory cells in the ear. And then he was several times here. I introduced him to the Physiological Society sometimes in the 50s, I think. And then he got the Nobel Prize in 60, I think it is 61 or something like that. No, anyhow, 61, that's right. Bekesi, the discoveries he made were made in America. Sweden offered him a position as professor at Karolinska, but he wanted to go further away from Europe during this upheaval, the Nazi and the Russian. So he went to America and got the possibility to work at MIT. Now, he was then given a prize, a local prize. He should go to New York to receive a local prize, and that should be given to him in the Waldorf Astoria. He went to New York, and he went to the library and read, and then he went to the Waldorf Astoria, and that was full, the press, international press. And he was the only one who didn't know why the press was there. He was the only one who didn't know that he had gotten the Nobel Prize. Came to fetch that small prize, but actually the news had come out that he had gotten the Nobel Prize. And then I had to read this, what Tundorfsky, somebody asked him, but Dr. Bekesi, don't you know you just won the Nobel Prize? Bekesi acknowledged the information, and then he asked, who else? When he was told that he was the only recipient, he smiled and said, that's better. Then he went to the luncheon in his honor, pocketed his award, and went back to the public library. He was always living absolutely alone. When you met him in the museum, because he was an art collector, very well experienced in art, especially in Chinese art, that he had collected a lot. And when he came then to fetch the prize, he tried to get rid of the press. So when I should meet him, I didn't know where he should appear, if you could go by train or not. And we found out that he came with planes. So I met him, and the first he said, I am not equipped for this sort of thing. And then he really made the whole Nobel week.
But just a moment. You told me that when you met him at the airport, he told you he would need two prizes.
No, was that when we went to the city.
Yes.
Yeah. We went and did a taxi into the city, and he said then very serious to me that, well, actually, he said, I would need two Nobel Prizes. And I think, yes, but I think you should be happy, George, because you are not sharing. It's very seldom that the prize is given just to one, so you have to be satisfied. And then at the King's dinner, and they said, why should you have two prizes? Yes, he said, because there is a Rembrandt for sale in Stockholm, and I want to buy that. And then was the King's dinner, and I told this story to the king, and the king said, well, you have to tell him that this Rembrandt is not worth two prizes, but ask him to come again to me, because I didn't know that he was interested in art. Now the king, the old king, was very much interested in, as you know, in Chinese art. So he was invited, and they spent a whole day together on Chinese art. And when Begesi died, I got some letters that he has written, and when he died, the whole collection, his whole collection, in his will was given to the Nobel Foundation. So that's paid. And then in his writing, he tells about the joy that he had discussing the art together with the old king. And he really did everything, even the last night, together with the students. I think it's a beautiful picture of the as lonely man with the students with all the instruments around him. Maybe we should also have some picture of Olivecrona.
Yes, that is what I wanted to ask you. You were a good friend of Olivecrona and of Lexell, so you should tell us something about these two personalities.
Yeah, Olivecrona, I remember very well when he started. I was a young student then. That was in the 30s when he started experiments, let's say, on dogs, and then when he went on with brain operations. He had been with Cushing, and very, very soon he got quite a name here in Sweden. It took some time. At that time, it took time until he got a position as professor. There was no professorship in neurosurgery, and it has to be instituted, and I think that was in the late 30s. And then I came into the faculty, so we were also together in the faculty. I was, promoted when I was made doctor. He was the man, the promoter so I was promoted by Olivecrona. And we had also cooperation because some of his young people around him were sent or came to me to do basic neurophysiological work. They wanted to also to do some experimental work, and so we had in that way cooperation. Lexell, before he became professor after Olivecrona, I met very early. We were students at the same time, and then he was working at the Department of Neurophysiology when he made the discovery of the innovation of the gamma system. And that was during the war. Then he came after Olivecrona. This is from a meeting among down in Venezuela. And that's a rather nice picture.
And as I told you, it's a typical Olivecrona picture. You could not say whether he is an important surgeon or a very important merchant or a mafia chief with his hat, like in the American films.
He, of course, then, this was down in Venezuela and in Caracas, and he was also at the meeting, but he was also there the day when he gave his talk. Else, I think he was operating and played golf, because as soon as he came to some new place, he asked about the golf and with whom he would like to play. This is I should end with that, and this perhaps would be interesting. That's from the same meetings. They're all now, the first row are all there. There's Torsten Tyrell, physiologist, member
Nobel
of physiology.
Prize winner too.
In
chemistry. Not Tyrell.
Tyrell physiology. Yeah, no, not Hugo.
Not Hugo.
No, this is Torsten, who is a membrane physiologist, interested in nerve membrane. There's Soterman, the very well-known neurophysiology, physiologist in Stockholm on temperature and taste. And there is Herbert Gasser, George Wald, who we have seen before, and Hedén from Göteborg, Bullock from America, Pallade from the Rockefeller Institute. And that is also a picture of Olivecrona giving his lecture at that time. Now, speaking about brains, this is a very special brain. That was must have been 75 something. Swedenborg, the fantastic naturalist of the 18th century, he went to, he had these revelations, and he started with this mystical, apocalyptic philosophy, and went to England, where he were more appreciated than in Sweden. And he died in England. Now, later on, he was moved to the body was moved to Sweden, and it was buried in Uppsala. That was a rumor that there's something wrong with this, that because he would have the wrong skull. It was at the time when people collected skulls. That was the same with Cartesius, the cat. His skull was also stolen. There were several skulls around. And in the 1930s, the coffin was opened, and it was rather easy to see that it was not a Swedenborg skull. They made a lot of the pathologist Henschen and Arne Engström in medical physics. They made an investigation. It was obvious that this is the wrong skull. When I was then in charge of the academy, the librarian, Nodelberg, told me that it's a rumor that now that the skull, Swedenborg skull, is owned by an old couple in Wales. It shouldn't be there. I think it should come to Sweden. So he went there, said, why don't you go there and ask them if we could get it. He went there, but they were not willing to give the skull. But some years later, it appeared on Sotheby's. And then we thought, really, now is the possibility to maybe to buy it. So we asked the Minister of Research if the government could put up a guarantee sum of what you think some would be, 60,000 we put up, to buy it. But then they withdraw. So we got the skull for nothing. And it came to the academy. Now, why do you know it is Swedenborg skull? Yes, because when he was old, around 70, he said, it's so funny, because a new tooth is coming out in the up here. And that's not very common. And sure enough, the skull had a tooth. It had a shape that you could see that it was Swedenborg. It's a quite strange shape. And this happened to be when the skull came to the academy. And there is Lexell. Of course, he was interested in the brain of the skull and the brain of Swedenborg. And there is Stig Ramel, who at that time was the director of the Nobel Foundation. And that's when we got the skull. The skull was then, of course, moved to the coffin in Uppsala, the dome. The complication was that now Swedenborg had two skulls. That was not very good, so the other skull was buried in what is his own grave. Now, this is so far. This is a picture from the academy where we meet, and as you mentioned, I am now science advisor to His Majesty, because he is interested in environment and has taken a lot of interest in the academy. He's often there. We're sitting there together. There is the president at that time, Erik Lundberg, economist, and there is Richard Leakey from Africa, who was there to give a lecture. That's me, and this is actually when we go, we had a reception for Leakey. And here are all the portraits of the old fellows with Linnaeus in the middle.
So, and then we reached to the subject of the Academy of Science, where you were a long time the president. Yeah. What was your activity there?
Well, first as president, you serve as president, but the fellow who, when you are made secretary, you move from your professorship because you are then get a position as secretary. That is you're in private society. What you do, you are acting director more or less, and the Swedish Academy is rather active and has also various institutes, especially with international activities in marine biology, in astrophysics, in the subarctic natural sciences up in the north, in mathematics, quite a good one, in environment and energy questions. And so that means also a lot of executive work. Now, of course, then you have the Nobel Prizes, and there's arranged a lot of symposia, international symposia, and we also asked to give advice to the government for certain questions. So it's rather active. I got interested during that time. I got interested in, of course, you can't avoid that when you meet all the people from the early times, and history of science, and met my early predecessor, Berzelius, who was secretary for 30 years in the beginning of the 18th century. So I could not got rid of him. I started to write about him, and this is the first book I wrote. And that is when his travel in France among live scholars and dead volcanoes, because at that time it was a lot of discussion of the if basalt was of eruptive or of marine origin, and therefore he made the French scientists invited him to come down. They wanted to show him really that this is a volcanic product. Berzelius was quite a fellow with wide interests, and I have difficulties in getting rid of him. So that's something that you also...
You wrote a number of books about him.
Also no, I forgot one thing, and that is perhaps that could be added, because I remember you asked me about it, and that was the training of young people in neurophysiology, of young people going into clinics. And several of my young collaborators were trained in neurophysiology and went into clinical neurophysiology, some of them, and then in neurosurgery, for instance, Meyerson, who is working here in Karolinska Hospital, and Boom.
Lexell was also in physiology.
Lexell was earlier.
Yes.
Boom in Uppsala.
Sjöqvist also with Soterman.
Sjöqvist Soterman, ja. Then in Uppsala, Boom was neurosurgery. There's also psychiatrists came to get basic training, and medicine, and ophthalmiatric, audiology, several in audiology. We took that as a sort of duty to serve as to give the possibility to work in basic science.
And to be trained in a scientific thinking and research methodology.
Sure.
Yes. Now, yesterday we discussed a little about the creativity and what makes these people, like all these Nobel Prize winners, to become creative. And you mentioned that it was a lot of knowledge and intuition.
You have to have a lot of knowledge, but not to be to believe in all of it. You have to be
critical.
Open. You have to be open to be able to look at nature in a new way. That is what it is about. To make new observations, not to be bound. And also, when you make an observation, to have the intuition or fantasy to select one which really gives a it's not very easy you may be mistaken. And I know by experience with these nipples that is a sort of strange thing, but how happy we were to see something new. But then comes the question, you have to explain, this is not a discovery, it's a discovery when you can explain what it does, and not to leave it. So you have to have the observant mind, the fantasy, ingenuity, and also to have the energy and to hang on.
So your creative personality has to have something we should call intuition or so, something which makes him to decide for the right idea, which should be solvable, not something which cannot be solved with the background knowledge what we have. And then he has to be able to choose the right methodology. And this methodology should be elegant, economic. You mentioned the word economic, and you mentioned one of the experiments which were so simple with this visual art, heart rays. No. So that it's simple, economic, and what is simple and economic is also beautiful. And that is what characterizes a creative personality. And then, as you mentioned again, then he has to be stubborn, to beat in the matter, and then not to leave it easily. And to have the courage to accept even to be ridiculized, because many will not accept the new things. And he has to have this courage to accept that, yes, I found something, you don't believe in it, but I will prove that you will believe.
There are very good examples of that. The simplicity and beauty is, that's why I think Heartland's example is very good. But what you say, you have a good example of when Einstein came, nobody believed him. Max Planck, it took, I think, 20 years until he got the Nobel Prize, until he really understood what it was about. And that is typically with those things which totally changes the whole view of matter, of course. Both things does, not only matter, but also time. I think they're good examples. It's interesting to see that it takes such a time. It was very early. I think it was also 20 years until Einstein got the prize.
Yeah. And what we discussed again is that for a creative personality is typical that he will pay attention to small things, to odd things, which others will not observe it.
Yeah.
And he will say, yes, that is significant.
Yes.
Yes. But then, of course, he has to be critical and to check whether these things are.
It's easy to do a lot of things on something which is absolutely uninteresting. I've done that too. That's what we all, not all, but I have experienced that too, to do a lot of experiments on things which later on found out wasn't interesting at all. And but I think it's something common in art and science in some way. You could say it, for instance, that the French Impressionists, they looked at nature in a new way, and they learned people to look at nature in a new way. For instance, if you take Sisley, that's very interesting. Sisley's pictures, he strengthens the contrast. So that means if it is black and white, this is black and this is white. He makes the black blacker near the white. and he makes the white whiter near the borderline. And the funny thing is, that is what the eye does. So when it is absolutely, with no shift, but you see it in the way that the black is blacker near to the borderline, the white is whiter into the borderline. So that was what the eye does.
Yes.
So Lee has increased that in his picture.
And what do you mean? Instinctually, or it was some knowledge of this?
Yeah, well, this is intuition. And again, intuition. What is knowledge then, and what's in the intuition?
Yeah. And at the same time, we used to say that the science and the creativity is, at the base of the creativity is also this human homoludence, to play with things.
Well, that is important.
Yes.
That, for creativity, that's absolutely important. And when you feel it, very much feel it, is that when I write books out of science, for instance, when I'm now writing a lot on various people like Berzelius, I cannot write if I am not enjoy it. I must have to enjoy it. It's absolutely impossible. That is, you have to play.
But I would like to ask you something. As you saw so many creative people, and at the same time a lot of people working hard, seriously, with high motivation, and they will never manage to get something. What is that? What is this handicap which makes these valuable people and hard-working people that they fail to make something pertinent?
No, of course, in science, a lot of work has to be done, which is just to put one stone to the next. I mean that we have to have that too, actually.
Also important.
Yeah, very important. I mean that is absolutely necessary. I mean, and if you look at the Nobel Prize again, if you take a man like Ramon Cajal, the neuroanatomist, he got the Nobel Prize in the beginning of the century, and what he did was actually putting one piece to another to describe the network of the retina, for instance, and the cortical network. That was a lot of systematic, tedious work. And in this case, it can be very difficult to formulate the prize. What is given? Is it a discovery? Well, it is discoveries about and on, but which is, of course, quite different from the discovery of genetic code, where you can point to just that. That's the same with Sherrington, with a lot of basic work put like one stone on the other when he described the integrating action of the nervous system. And that was also quite difficult to formulate a prize. So he got it for reciprocal innovation. But of course it meant that he was honored for the big piece he had done on the whole nervous system.
Professor Bernhard, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the possibilities of the basic research to solve in long term the practical problem of disease, of human misery? Of human misery, of disease and suffering. In long term, of course.
The trouble is, in the last 20 years has had not too much to do with medicine. But you see, it comes all the time, new discoveries. I think one has to be, I think I'm optimistic, yes.
So we should end with this optimistic note.
No.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.